My name is Matt Borwell, and in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to do your own sound while also shooting. Doing your own sound as a documentary cinematographer is pretty difficult, because obviously you have so much to focus on with the camera and capturing a good image. When then you add sound on top of that, it can be pretty intimidating. Now, this isn't something you should do all the time, and there's really a specific place and time that it makes sense to do it. And that reason always comes down to the story. But if you do find yourself in that situation, I'm going to walk you through a few different ways that I build out my camera with sound to accomplish what I need to do. We'll look at just recording 2 tracks of audio to your camera. We'll also look at recording 3 tracks of audio to your camera, even if you only have 2 XLR inputs. We'll also look at recording 4 tracks of audio if you have something like an extension unit for the Canon C500MKII. And then we'll also look at using an external sound recorder if you need to just have a few more tracks or your camera's not capable of recording what you need. The camera that I have here is the Canon C500MKII, and it has 2 XLR inputs that offer line, mic, and mic with phantom power options. So if you only have 2 channels of audio in your camera, what are those 2 channels going to be? The first channel should pretty much always be your camera mic, and this should be living on your camera regardless of whether you're recording onto that second channel or not. And in that second input, you're probably going to be working with the wireless microphone. And so between these 2 items, between your camera mic and your lav, you're going to be able to capture good sound. What's really important when you're recording your own sound to cameras is keeping your inputs consistent. Not only does this help the editor in post to know that track 1 is always going to be a certain microphone and track 2 is always going to be another, but it also helps you stay focused. Because if you're having to think about, wait, do I have this microphone on one or that microphone on one? Then it's distracting you from what you need to do, it's going to slow you down, and it's potentially just going to record bad sound. So let's take a look at the camera and see how I like to configure this out. So in this setup, I'm going to be recording my camera mic to input 1. So what I'll do is I'll switch this input over to mic with phantom power, and that way the camera will supply power to that camera mic. And in the second channel is where I'll put my lavalier microphone. So what I like to do is I have these cold shoes on the top of the camera, and I'll just put this here, and that way it is accessible. I can get to it, I can make any power adjustments, I can make any setting adjustments, but it's also out of the way so that it's not hitting me in the head or hitting me in the body, depending on how I'm holding the camera. So you might notice that I have this colored piece of tape on my audio receiver. What I do here is that I also put the same color on the XLR connector on the cable. And so that way, if I need to disconnect anything, I always know what cable is going with what receiver, and it just helps keep me organized as I have all this stuff building up so that I don't have to think about what's going on into what channel. When it comes to the settings for this, I generally send out a mic line, and so I'll set my input to mic input. This is running off a AA battery, so it doesn't need phantom power, and then from there, I'm good to go. All right, so now I have my 2 mics set up. I've got my camera mic, and that's going to input 1, and I have my lavalier microphone, and that's going to input 2. On this camera, there's an audio status, and so if I click that, it brings up a larger display of what my levels are, and then I'm able to tune those in and be good to go. The other thing that I can do with this camera that most cameras can do is I can designate what channels I'm listening to. So in this situation, because we just have 2 tracks, it's really not that complicated, but as you start to add more and more tracks, sometimes you only want to listen to one or another as opposed to hearing the full mix of everything. And so on here, you can see that right now I'm monitoring channel 1 in the left ear and channel 2 in the right. And so that way, if I need to just listen to one, I can pop one side out of my headphones and then I can listen to the other. Or you can go in and you can mix 1 and 2 on both left and right to just hear that full mix. And then you'll also want to set your headphone volume level to be high enough where you can hear any small sounds that might be coming up. Let's take a look at what if we want to add a 3rd track. Now, oftentimes just having the camera mic and 1 lav can be a little limiting unless you're working just with a single subject. And you might want to just have a secondary lav. So with a camera like this, and a lot of these cameras will have the similar thing, is I have 2 dedicated XLR inputs that I've got, control dials for levels on the side of the camera, but then it will also have a mic input. And so with this, what I can do is I can send a secondary lav to that mic input and record it as a third track. And so if I go ahead and mount my secondary lav receiver to the top of the camera, where I have this cold shoe on the camera that lives there and ready to go, and I can now plug this into the mic input on the back of the camera. I'm going to go into the menu and make sure that my audio input selection is correct, where channel 1 and channel 2, like before, are set to the input terminals on the side of the camera, and then channel 3 and channel 4 are going to be set to the mic terminal. To be able to control the levels of this microphone, it's going to have to be within the camera. And so this can be a pretty difficult thing to do if you're needing to constantly adjust levels on the fly. So I'm always going to keep my primary audio channels going to the XLR inputs where I have the dial to make fine-tune adjustments. And this is particularly important with a camera microphone or a boom mic because you're always going to be adjusting those levels in some degree throughout the shoot. But when it comes to a lavalier, oftentimes you can just find a level that will work for the volume of a person's voice, and it's going to cover you in most situations. So if we go into the menu, I can come down and I can choose my record level for that channel 3. And in this case, because I'm sending one input into that mic channel, it's going to duplicate it on track 3 and track 4. So I will go in and I will find a level that makes sense. And so if I take my microphone here for channel 2 and I'm doing a test, you can see that it's riding pretty hot. So I might bring this down a little bit. And once I get that down to a place that looks good, then I'm just going to set it and effectively forget it. If I need to go in, then I can make that change. But as you can see, it's a little bit of a setup to be able to get in there and adjust those levels. And so again, I think it's important to make sure that whatever microphone you're putting on this is either more of a secondary or it's a microphone that doesn't need the same level of fine-tune adjustments that your others do. Oftentimes what can be nice with this third audio channel is I can use this as basically a plant mic. I can put this inside of a coffee mug and put it on a table, and that'll just help capture a little bit of ambient sound from the conversation. Sometimes this can just give a little bit of additional coverage in a larger scene. So again, now that we've added a third track to our audio, oftentimes you might want to go into the menu and designate what you're listening to. Anytime that you get these mics set up, I would recommend just listening to one track at a time to make sure that things are clean, that your levels are set, and that you're good to go, and then move on to track 2, and then move on to track 3. Once that's done, then generally speaking with 3 tracks of audio is I will just listen to the mix across the board to make sure that I'm getting good, consistent, clean sound throughout. From here, we're going to move on to recording 4 tracks of audio to your camera. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out this battery plate with Canon's extension unit EUV2, which will give me 2 more additional XLR inputs. All right, so I've got the Canon extension unit now put on the back of my camera. And as you can see here, it adds 2 more additional XLR inputs, which is really nice when you're needing to do your own sound and keep things clean, isolated, and easily controllable. And this camera can only record 4 tracks of audio, so I no longer have the mic input option as an additional input from the 4 that are on the body now. Let's figure out which mics we want to put into which inputs. In this instance, I'm actually going to reallocate what microphone is going to what input so that I can have easier access for controlling levels for mics that need it more often versus ones that don't. And so since my input 1 and my input 2 are on the opposite side of the camera from when I have it on my shoulder and I'm operating, I'm going to dedicate my 2 lavs to input 1 and input 2. I'm actually going to put the camera mic and my wireless boom that we'll get to in a second onto tracks 3 and 4, because that way the adjustments for those are on the operator side of the camera. And so it's a lot easier for me to open that up and dial it in when I have the camera on my shoulder, as opposed to needing to flip the camera around to be able to make those adjustment levels. I've actually labeled my inputs boom and camera mic and lav 1 and lav 2 on the side of the camera. Because as I was saying, it's really important to keep things organized so that you always know what is where and you're not having to think about what's in what input. Because as you start to add more tracks of audio, it becomes way more complicated to keep this stuff straight. When you've got the camera on your shoulder, you're seeing 4 different levels bouncing on the screen, and one of them is off. It can be pretty distracting to try to think about what is where. All right, so now we have 3 channels of audio plugged into the camera. We have our camera mic, we have our primary lav, and we have our secondary lav. Now with our last remaining input, what I generally will do, and if I'm running 4 tracks of audio, it generally means that I've got a larger scene to cover, I have more characters to cover, and so I could add a third lav. If we're only working with 3 people, that would be great. But what I feel like you're always missing when you don't have a sound recordist is a floating boom. Having a boom mic is incredibly important to be able to follow the action, be able to follow the conversation, be able to cover multiple people from one microphone. And that's just something that you can't have if you don't have a sound recordist. I should correct that in saying you can have it, but you need to get a little bit creative with how you do it. So the way that I set up my wireless boom is I will take an additional shotgun microphone, and I have this Sennheiser wireless transmitter. And this is effectively doing the same thing that a wireless lav transmitter is doing, but instead of having an input for a lavalier microphone, it just has an XLR input. And so if I plug this into my microphone, this particular model that I have here will provide phantom power through the AA's that are provided. There's a cheaper option that does not provide phantom power, and so if you're wanting to do this setup, you still can. Just make sure that you're using a microphone that's self-powered. And I have a dedicated receiver for this, which I have clearly labeled as boom. And this is what's going to get plugged into my channel 3. So what I like to do with this is I will mount this directly on top of the extension unit underneath my 2 other lavs. So now I have 3 receivers going right here. It takes up a little bit of space, but it is very neat and very tidy and very accessible. And I will plug this into my input 3. And I will now check and make sure that my input 4, which is my camera microphone, is set to mic with phantom power because that microphone requires power. And then my input 3, which is my wireless boom, will be set to mic level because it doesn't require power since the transmitter is doing it for it. So at this point, I now have 4 independent tracks of audio being recorded to my camera. I have the camera mic, I have Lav 1, I have Lav 2, and I have a wireless boom. Now, I feel like this is plenty of audio channels to try to keep up with while you're trying to shoot. I would be hard-pressed to think that you'd be able to manage any more than these 4 channels while you're also trying to shoot. But we'll get to that in a minute. So with my wireless boom, I will then give this to a producer. I'll explain to them effectively how it works, general concepts like you want to make sure that this is pointed at them, you don't want it going over, that it really is only picking up what's in front of the microphone as opposed to what's around it. And the thing is you're not going to get as good a sound with your producer booming this microphone as you would a sound recordist. But if you're in a situation where you need to do this without having a sound recordist, this is definitely a much better option than not having it at all. So this will be put onto a shock mount and a boom pole, give this to the producer. And in this case, they don't have to control levels of anything. All they need to do is point this in the right direction. And then I independently am able to control the levels, monitor the sound, and make any adjustments that are necessary within the camera or kind of directing the producer to point the mic in a separate direction. So at this point, I'm now going to have a lot of bouncing levels on my screen and a lot of things to keep track of. And so once again, this is why it is so important to stay organized with this, having things make as much logical sense as possible, and labeling things on your camera. I have programmed into the My Menu setting, which I have programmed onto an assignable button on both my EVF if I'm handheld, or on a button on the front of the camera if I'm shooting from the hip, that I can quickly tap that, and I'm able to go in and change what audio input I'm listening to at a given point if I just want to focus on a lav and make sure that I'm not getting any scratches, or I just want to focus on the producer's boom. You're going to be constantly switching back and forth between what microphone you want to listen to, and once you feel like things are in a good place, then you might switch back and just listen to the full mix. But this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated when you're trying to do your own sound while also shooting. Is when you're wanting to make sure that all of your levels are clean while also trying to operate a shot, keep it in focus, and keep a good framing. And so doing something with this many audio tracks on it means you should really be incredibly comfortable with your handheld shooting abilities, and that everything that you're doing from exposure and focus is second nature, where that can then leave a little bit of extra bandwidth in your brain to monitor the audio levels. But if you're still in a place where you're fighting, trying to get the camera to do what you want it to do, then you're going to overload yourself very quickly with all of these audio channels. So if at all possible, if you have to do your own sound, try to keep it down to just 1 or 2 tracks. All right, so at the moment, we have 4 tracks of audio going into this camera. But let's say that you need more. I would be hard-pressed to find a situation where you would need more that you could actually keep up with while you're also trying to film yourself. But if you do need that, then you might be going to an external recorder. And in this case, I have the Zoom H6. This gives me 4 additional inputs for a total of 8 channels. If need be. When I would generally pull this out, if I already have 4 tracks of audio going here, is these are going to be dedicated to all the subjects that I'm following in a scene. But say you're filming at an event where there is a stage with microphones and there's a feed going to the sound booth. Well, you can take that feed and you can plug that directly into this, where you can set a level if they send you tone, or you can listen to rehearsal, set a level, press record, and walk away. That's what these are really great for. If you're in a situation where you have, say, 6 people around a table and you're able to mic all of them, then maybe you just put your lavs into here, and then you just focus on, say, a wireless boom and a camera mic on your camera, and have a producer monitor these levels. Once you start to get beyond this, you're probably going to need an extra set of eyes and ears to be able to monitor all of these inputs. But that's possible to do with an external recorder if you don't have the space in the camera to record it all. Now, having seen the various ways that I build up my camera depending on what the sound needs are, I hope this was helpful for you to get a better understanding of what the limitations are, how to work within those limitations, and how to stay focused on what you need to do. I can't stress enough the importance of keeping things as simple as possible. When you're trying to record your own sound and shoot at the same time, there's so many things that can distract you from what's important. And so it's really important to have a tight audio kit, to be as organized as possible, and keep things clear and managed. I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, sound is the most important part of a documentary, because without it, you can't follow the story. And so if you find yourself being overwhelmed by needing to capture your own sound, then make sure that you A, speak up to your production and explain to them the difficulties of doing both sound and picture, see if it's possible to hire a sound recordist, and if not, at least understand and communicate what the limitations are and the best way to approach a scene based on what you're able to capture. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel, where I cover all things related to documentary and verite cinematography. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again.